In a world where loyalty is everything, how far can trust really stretch when the ultimate betrayal is hidden in plain sight? The wife of a powerful mafia boss turns informant for the FBI, setting off a shocking series of events that lead to a deadly price for her loyalty. Terrence T. Johnson, a top-tier mafia boss, had it all: legitimate businesses, a perfect marriage to Kira, a dedicated cop. But when Kira uncovered his dark empire, her decision to expose him would cost her everything. Terrence's carefully crafted life was about to crumble, and so was the woman who thought she could handle the truth. Before we dive into this twisted tale, make sure to like and subscribe to Crime Chronicles for more chilling stories that expose the darkest corners of human behavior. Terrence T. Johnson had built his empire meticulously, using a web of legitimate businesses to cover up his dark mafia operations. He ran high-end car dealerships, exclusive nightclubs, and real estate ventures that were all fronts for laundering money from his illegal dealings. To the public, he was the picture of success, charismatic, polished, and respected. But behind closed doors, he was a feared mafia boss, commanding a criminal network that spanned far and wide. At home, Terrence wore a different face, the loving husband to Kira, a dedicated cop who had no idea about his criminal life. Kira, at 35, had always believed in her husband's integrity. She trusted him implicitly, never questioning his comings and goings. To her, Terrence was the ideal partner, supportive, affectionate, and everything she had ever wanted. Their marriage seemed rock solid, built on mutual respect, shared goals, and unwavering loyalty. Terrence made sure never to bring anything related to his mafia activities home, keeping the two worlds completely separate. He was attentive to Kira's needs, always showering her with love and attention. He made sure to attend her police department events, and they spent weekends together, enjoying their quiet, comfortable life in their luxurious home. Their evenings were spent talking over dinner, laughing at shared jokes, and making plans for the future. Kira often talked about her career aspirations, and Terrence was always her biggest cheerleader. He'd tell her how proud he was of the work she did as a cop, even though he'd never share the full truth of his own dealings. Kira, in turn, was proud of her husband, admiring the way he seemed to have it all together. She never suspected the dark truth lurking just beneath the surface of his success. To her, Terrence was just a businessman, a loving husband, and a man who'd made a life for himself that she could be proud of. They were the perfect couple, and she had no reason to believe otherwise. But even as Kira worked tirelessly in the police department, investigating the city's underworld and its criminals, her husband's world continued to operate in the shadows, undiscovered. The trust Kira placed in him became the perfect cover, and her obliviousness to his double life made her the ideal partner in the world of crime he so carefully shielded from her. The two worlds were about to collide, but for now, Kira remained blissfully unaware, believing in the love they shared, while Terrence's empire grew ever more dangerous. On a chilly November afternoon in 2021, Kira received a call that would set her on a path toward a truth she wasn't prepared to face. The FBI had intercepted a massive drug shipment that was supposed to arrive in Detroit, one that was linked to a criminal syndicate known for smuggling narcotics and money across state lines. The bust had been the result of months of covert surveillance, but as the agents began to examine the details of the operation, something stood out to Kira. The names, locations, and methods involved in the shipment seemed eerily familiar. Kira had been working for the Detroit Police Department for over 12 years, and she had seen her fair share of criminal operations. But the details of this one felt too close to home. The shipment was being handled through a seemingly legitimate distribution company located in a warehouse district, one that was owned by none other than a business partner of her husband's, Terrence T. Johnson. She knew the company well. Terrence had mentioned it to her on several occasions as one of his more lucrative ventures. But she had never questioned how he made his money, until now. Her first instinct was to brush it off. After all, it was just a coincidence, right? Terrence had been running businesses for years. But as Kira dug deeper into the investigation, she discovered that the shipment was only one part of a much larger operation. The FBI had been tracking Terrence's partner, an individual by the name of Ronnie, the fixer, Watson, for some time. Ronnie's ties to organized crime were well known to law enforcement, but they had never been able to link him directly to any major crimes. The more Kira examined the files, the more troubling the connections became. Ronnie's name appeared in a series of communications about a larger distribution network, one that operated out of the same club Terrence owned, a nightclub that catered to high-profile clientele. The club had always been considered a safe haven for politicians and businessmen, but Kira's instincts told her something wasn't right. She spent the next few weeks reviewing surveillance footage, wiretaps, and case files in her free time. She couldn't ignore the growing suspicion in her gut. In late December 2021, Kira received another jolt when she learned that a key piece of the drug shipment had gone missing, a van that had been tracked to a storage facility just a few blocks from one of Terrence's properties. The address was one Kira had visited many times, though she had no idea that it was part of her husband's operations. Her suspicions mounted as she uncovered more evidence. One night, after a long day of work, Kira met her best friend, Brandon, a former detective and now working as a private investigator. She confided in him about the troubling connections she had found. Brandon, known for his sharp instincts, agreed to help. Over the course of the next few weeks, he discreetly began tailing Terrence, monitoring his movements, and digging into his business dealings. What Brandon discovered sent chills down Kira's spine. Terrence had been visiting properties at odd hours, places that Kira had never known about. The more Brandon followed him, the more it became clear that her husband's involvement in criminal activity went far beyond just laundering money through his legitimate businesses. He was directly tied to the very syndicate the FBI was targeting. Kira's desire to protect her family and her love for her husband conflicted with the reality she was uncovering. Terrence had always been there for her, supporting her through her toughest cases and pushing her to be a better cop. But now, it seemed that everything he had built, everything she thought she knew about him, was a lie. It was on January 10, 2022, when Kira finally stumbled upon the undeniable truth. While reviewing a series of documents from the FBI's database, she found a list of shipments linked to Ronnie, the fixer, Watson, with one name at the top of the list, Terrence Johnson. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Her husband, the man she had trusted with everything, was at the center of a massive criminal network that spanned across the country. With a heavy heart, Kira made the decision that would change everything. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The desire to protect her family was now clouded by a deeper responsibility, to uphold the law. She knew that if she didn't act, the investigation would only continue to unravel, and soon enough, the Mafia's grip on Detroit would tighten even further. Kira found herself caught in a dangerous game, torn between her loyalty to the man she loved and the duty she had sworn to fulfill as a cop. There was no turning back now, she had to make a choice. It was late one evening when Kira's life took an irreversible turn. Terrence had come home late, as he often did, looking exhausted but avoiding any conversation about his day. He headed straight to the bedroom, leaving his briefcase by the door. Kira's heart pounded as she stared at it. For weeks, her gut had been telling her something was wrong, but she had never found the courage to confront him, until now. Terrence had always been careful about what he brought home, but tonight felt different. She couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her chest, and the temptation to finally know the truth overwhelmed her. She couldn't shake the nagging thought, what if it's really true? What if everything she had trusted was a lie? With a trembling hand, Kira grabbed the briefcase. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she was making a mistake, but then the determination in her gut pushed her forward. She opened it slowly, the sound of the latch clicking echoing in the silence. Inside, neatly arranged, were a series of documents and folders, ones Kira had never seen before. The first document she unfolded was a ledger detailing illegal transactions involving cash flows through various businesses, including the nightclub she had visited many times with Terrence. She skimmed over names she recognized: Ronnie, the fixer; Watson, Terrence's most trusted ally in the criminal world, along with other key figures in the Mafia. The more Kira read, the more she realized the scope of the operation her husband was involved in. This was not just a money laundering scheme, it was a full-fledged criminal enterprise, complete with connections to drug cartels, human trafficking, and organized hits. Her hands shook as she flipped through the documents, each one painting a darker picture. As she pulled out the final folder, she found blueprints and detailed plans for an upcoming shipment, a shipment she had already seen on the FBI's list. She could no longer deny it. Terrence wasn't just a businessman running some shady operations, he was at the heart of a mafia syndicate. The realization was a punch to the stomach. Everything she thought she knew about Terrence shattered. She had always believed him to be the man she married, the man who had supported her in her career and loved her unconditionally. But now, as she stared at the documents in her hands, the truth settled in: her husband was the very thing she had sworn to fight against. Kira sank down into the chair, her mind racing. Her emotions swirled between disbelief, anger, and betrayal. She couldn't just ignore it anymore. She had to act, but how? Her heart screamed at her to confront him, but her mind, the cop in her, told her that if she did, it would be too late. The Mafia had eyes everywhere, and if she made a wrong move, she could risk not only her life but the lives of those she loved most. But she couldn't keep this to herself, not when she knew how far his operation stretched. Kira made a decision that would alter the course of her life: she would go to the FBI. She had been investigating this for weeks, piecing together clues, and now she had undeniable proof that her husband was the very man they had been tracking. Kira carefully folded the documents and slid them back into the briefcase, ensuring no trace of her discovery remained. As she did, a sense of dread washed over her. She knew this was just the beginning, nothing could ever be the same again. But what was the alternative? Terrence's empire would keep growing, and people would keep getting hurt unless she took action. The next few days were a blur. Kira met with the FBI in secret, making arrangements to work as an informant. She passed along everything she had discovered, providing them with valuable intel on the inner workings of the Mafia. In return, they promised to protect her, but deep down, she knew how dangerous this was. If Terrence found out, he would never hesitate to silence her. To keep her involvement covert, Kira placed a tracking device on Terrence's briefcase. She knew that by doing so, she was walking a dangerous line. The device would track his movements and help the FBI identify key locations and contacts, but Kira was unaware that this small action would seal her fate. As she placed the device, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was signing her own death warrant. Terrence was growing increasingly paranoid about leaks within his operation. Recent busts had shaken him, and Kira noticed that he was more distant than usual. Little did she know, the tracking device was the final piece that would lead him straight to her. His most trusted ally, his wife, had become his greatest threat. Kira had made her decision, and as she handed over the information to the FBI, she crossed a line from which there was no return. She was no longer just a cop. She was an informant, a traitor in the eyes of the man she loved. But as the days went by, the gravity of her choice hit her harder. She had exposed her husband's world, but it came with a price she wasn't ready to pay. Terrence T. Johnson had always been a man in control, commanding, calculating, and methodical. But over the past few weeks, cracks began to form in his seemingly impenetrable armor. The FBI had hit his operations harder than ever before. Shipments had been seized, safe houses raided, and trusted associates arrested. The Mafia boss could no longer ignore the possibility that there was a leak within his inner circle. Someone was betraying him, and that betrayal was costing him millions, and possibly his life. It all began in mid-February 2022. As FBI agents closed in on his organization, Terrence grew restless. He could feel the walls closing in, but he didn't know where to turn. His trusted network, the people who had helped him build his criminal empire, were starting to look suspicious to him. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable. The turning point came when one of his most loyal bodyguards, Derek, began acting strangely. Derek had been with Terrence for over 5 years, always by his side in the darkest corners of his operations. But recently, his behavior had shifted. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, avoiding direct eye contact with Terrence, and his excuses for missing certain meetings were becoming more frequent. Terrence's paranoia reached a boiling point when Derek failed to show up for an important shipment drop-off. That was the final straw. Terrence couldn't afford any weakness in his ranks. As the hours passed without a word from Derek, he became convinced that the bodyguard was the leak. In a fit of rage, Terrence called Derek to meet him at a remote location, away from prying eyes. When Derek arrived, Terrence wasted no time. He accused him of being a mole, a betrayer of the family. Derek denied the accusations, but Terrence's mind was already made up. Without hesitation, he pulled out his gun and shot Derek dead, leaving his lifeless body in the dirt. The moment was chilling. Terrence was no longer just a mafia boss, he had become a man haunted by suspicion, willing to eliminate anyone who threatened his empire. But even as he stood over Derek's body, Terrence couldn't shake the feeling that his paranoia was getting the best of him. His tech guru, Lamar, who had helped him keep his operations under the radar, was growing concerned as well. Lamar had been working tirelessly to track down the source of the leaks, running sweeps on all of their communications and monitoring potential security breaches. He had been suspicious for a while, but after the killing of Derek, Lamar knew they had to dig deeper. One night, as Lamar was going through the logs of the encrypted communications, he stumbled upon something unusual. His eyes widened as he checked the data again. Someone had placed a tracking device on Terrence's briefcase. At first, Lamar thought it was a mistake, but as he traced the signal, he realized the device was high-tech, something only law enforcement, specifically the FBI, could have used. His blood ran cold as he pieced together the truth. The leak was much closer than they had imagined. Terrence had always been meticulous about his operations, but now, with the realization that the FBI was tracking him through his wife's briefcase, he felt the full weight of his betrayal. Lamar's face was a mix of shock and horror as he turned to Terrence, who was pacing the room. "Boss, it's her," Lamar said quietly, his voice heavy with the gravity of the moment. "It's Kira." The words hit Terrence like a punch to the gut. Kira, his wife, the woman who had stood by him through everything, who had supported him when no one else would, was the one leaking information to the FBI. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet ever could. Terrence stood still for a moment, processing the revelation. Then, in a fit of rage, he slammed his fist against the table, causing Lamar to flinch. His mind raced, and he felt the familiar, burning anger rising in him. How could she? How could Kira, the woman he had loved, the mother of his children, turn against him in this way? The tension in the room was suffocating. Terrence knew what he had to do. He couldn't allow anyone to expose his criminal empire, not now, not after all the work he had put into building it. If Kira had turned on him, she would pay the price. No one could cross him and live. Terrence's next move was chilling. He began making plans for a confrontation, an intimate setting where he could confront Kira face to face. He was sure of one thing. Once he confronted her, he would get the answers he needed. He needed to know how deep her betrayal ran. And if she was truly responsible for betraying him, he would make her regret it. In the back of his mind, Terrence also knew that this was no longer just a mafia matter, it was personal. His marriage, his family, his trust in Kira, all of it was on the line now. The man who once thought he had everything under control was spiraling into paranoia and vengeance, driven by the need to reclaim what he felt was rightfully his. As the days passed, the weight of his decision grew heavier. Terrence's mind turned over every possible outcome, but one thing was certain: Kira's fate was sealed. Terrence spent the days leading up to the confrontation consumed with rage and disbelief. His mind, once sharp and focused on his criminal empire, now spiraled into a dark vortex of vengeance and sorrow. He couldn't believe his wife, Kira, the woman he had trusted with his life, his secrets, and his family, had turned on him. But the evidence was undeniable, and the deep sense of betrayal coursed through his veins like poison. On the evening of March 4, 2022, Terrence invited Kira to a secluded cabin, nestled deep in the woods, far from the prying eyes of the city. He had told her it was an opportunity to reconnect, a chance to get away from the chaos of their lives. Kira, still oblivious to the storm brewing around her, agreed without hesitation. She thought this might be a chance to ease the tension in their marriage, to repair the cracks that had formed without her knowing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie orange glow over the landscape, Terrence led Kira into the cabin, his demeanor calm but distant. She sensed something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. They had shared so many moments like this before, and it was hard to believe that their perfect life could unravel so quickly. As they sat down together, the weight of the silence hung heavy in the air. But soon, Terrence's cold demeanor shifted. He asked her directly, his voice sharp and unwavering. "How long, Kira? How long were you planning to keep this from me?" Kira looked at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" Terrence leaned forward, his eyes piercing hers. "The FBI. The tracking device. The leaks. You're the one, aren't you?" Kira's heart raced, but she refused to show fear. "Terrence, I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm not. Don't lie to me." Terrence snapped, standing up and pacing the small room. "You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we built. You're working with them, aren't you? You've been the informant all along." Kira froze. The truth hit her like a freight train. He knew. And the man she had once trusted, her husband, the father of her children, was now looking at her with the eyes of a stranger. The love that once bound them together was now twisted into a weapon of destruction. She tried to explain, to reason with him, but the more she spoke, the more his anger surged. In a sudden flash of rage, Terrence grabbed her by the throat, his grip tightening with an unimaginable force. Kira struggled, her hands instinctively reaching for his wrist, but the strength in his hold was overpowering. She gasped for breath, her vision fading as panic set in. Her thoughts raced. She had never imagined this moment, never believed it would come to this. But it was happening. Terrence's eyes were wild with fury as he squeezed harder, and soon, Kira's body went limp in his arms. But that wasn't enough for him. In the madness of the moment, he pulled away, staring at her with cold, empty eyes. As if to erase every trace of the woman who had once been his partner, he grabbed a machete from the cabin's kitchen, its sharp edge gleaming in the dim light. The sound of the blade slicing through the air was drowned out by his own rage-fueled breathing. With a brutal swing, Terrence decapitated his wife, ensuring there was no evidence left of her betrayal. However, as he severed her head, Kira was still alive. The intense strangulation had rendered her weak, but she was still clinging to life, her body barely functioning as her head was detached. Blood poured from the wound, but her vital signs remained faint. Once the deed was done, Terrence didn't hesitate. He quickly packed a bag, leaving the cabin in a hurry. He knew the authorities would soon find her body, and by then, he needed to be far away. Within hours, he was on a private jet, fleeing the country without a trace. His empire, once built on deception, was now crumbling. But he didn't care, nothing mattered now but his own survival. Back in the city, the discovery of Kira's decapitated body sent shockwaves through the police department. Investigators were horrified by the brutality of the crime. Her missing person case, which had been opened the day after she disappeared, was now linked to a grisly murder. For the FBI, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. They knew Kira had been working with them, and they quickly realized the woman they had been relying on was now dead. It wasn't until 2 days later, on March 6, when a group of hikers passing through the woods near the cabin reported a foul smell drifting through the air. The source of the odor led them directly to the cabin. The moment they stepped inside, they were hit with the horrific scene. Kira's body lay in the middle of the room, her head gruesomely severed from her body, but there was something else. Despite the obvious signs of death, her eyes were still open, blood staining the floor beneath her. The authorities quickly arrived at the scene, and the medical examiner's report revealed that Kira was still alive when her head was removed. The strangulation had left her unconscious but barely alive, and when Terence decapitated her, she had been in a weak, almost comatose state. The horror of her last moments, fighting for breath while her husband ended her life, sent shivers down the spine of everyone involved in the investigation. The news spread quickly, sending the city into shock. Kira had been a respected officer, a symbol of loyalty and justice. Her brutal murder was a stark reminder of how far betrayal could go, and how dangerous the consequences could be. But as the investigation into her death ramped up, one question remained unanswered: where was Terence? By the time authorities began piecing together the events leading to Kira's death, Terence had vanished without a trace. His name was on every wanted list, his face splashed across news outlets, but he was already gone. The man who had once been the king of the streets, the mastermind behind a powerful criminal empire, had slipped through their fingers. Kira's murder became a chilling reminder of the price of betrayal. In the end, her loyalty to the law and her desire to bring down the man she had loved had led to her tragic and violent death. The city mourned, but the hunt for Terence T. Johnson was just beginning. As the authorities launched a manhunt that spanned continents, they knew one thing for sure: Terence was a man who would stop at nothing to protect himself, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had ever known. The shocking end to Kira's life reveals the true dangers of betrayal. She thought she could handle the truth and protect her family, but in the end, her actions sealed her fate. Terence, driven by rage and paranoia, was willing to do anything to protect his empire, even if it meant killing the woman he once loved. Kira's death is a tragic story of loyalty, trust, and the devastating consequences of crossing someone in power. What would you do if you discovered your spouse was living a double life, and you were faced with the choice of exposing them or protecting your family? Could you live with the consequences? If this story shocked you, like and subscribe to Crime Chronicles for more tales that delve into the darkest corners of betrayal and human behavior.